My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 35 years old, and the night I walked into my younger brother's wedding was supposed to be the first peaceful night I'd had in years. I wasn't there for attention. I wasn't there for praise. And I definitely wasn't there expecting anyone to thank me for everything I sacrificed to help him get there. I came because the little boy I practically raised was getting married. And for one single evening, I wanted to sit quietly, smile proudly, and feel like I belonged beside him without needing to justify why. The wedding was being held at a luxury estate outside Charleston, South Carolina. Everything about the place screamed money. Crystal chandeliers, perfect white roses, gold-trimmed glasses, soft piano music floating through the ballroom. Even the air felt expensive. People spoke softly there, like loud emotions weren't allowed inside rich rooms. I remember standing near the entrance for a second, adjusting my navy blue dress, and trying not to feel out of place. Because no matter how polished a room looks, some people can still make you feel poor without saying a word. My brother Ethan spotted me almost immediately. His entire face lit up. "Claire." He walked straight through a crowd of guests and hugged me so tightly I almost cried right there. For a second, everything felt okay again. Not because life had been easy, but because he still looked at me the same way he did when he was 14 and terrified after our parents died. Like I was home. "You look beautiful," he told me. I laughed softly. "You look terrified." "I am terrified." "That means you actually love her." He smiled at that. And for one small moment, I truly believed the night would be good. Then I noticed the bride's father watching us from across the ballroom. Richard Holloway. Tall. Silver-haired. Perfect tuxedo. Both times he looked at me politely. The same way people look at workers setting up chairs before an event. Not rude enough to call out. Not kind enough to forget. Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "Please just survive tonight." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He forced a smile. "Nothing. Just. Dad Holloway can be intense sometimes." Before I could ask more, someone called Ethan toward the photographer. He squeezed my shoulder and walked away. I should have followed him. Instead, I walked toward my assigned table near the edge of the ballroom. The reception hall looked stunning. Candles flickered across mirrored centerpieces. A jazz band played softly near the stage. Servers moved through the room balancing trays of champagne. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. I found my seat and reached for the small white name card resting against my plate. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was reading. Then the words hit me all at once. Poor, uneducated sister living off her brother. My entire body went cold. I stared at the card again. Surely I had read it wrong. But no. The sentence was still there. Written in elegant black calligraphy. Carefully printed. Carefully placed. Not an accident. A decision. Then I heard it. Laughter. Quiet at first. Then spreading across nearby tables like people had been waiting for the exact moment I noticed. A woman covered her mouth while whispering something to her husband. Two younger guests smirked openly. Someone near the bar actually laughed loud enough for me to hear it clearly. And suddenly I understood the truth. People already knew. This humiliation had been planned. Not just written. Presented. Like entertainment. My fingers tightened around the place card so hard the edges bent. I looked across the ballroom and saw Richard Holloway watching me calmly with a glass of wine in his hand. Like he was waiting to see whether I would break publicly or quietly. For one painful second, I considered leaving. I thought maybe I should just walk out. Protect Ethan's wedding. Protect his happiness. Protect him from being forced to choose between me and the family he was marrying into. Because that's what I had always done. Protected him. When our parents died in a highway accident, Ethan was only 11. I was 19. Too young to become someone's parent. Too broke to become someone's guardian. Too exhausted to become both. But life never asked whether I was ready. It simply handed me responsibility and waited. I dropped out of college 2 semesters before graduation. Worked mornings at a grocery store. Worked nights cleaning office buildings. Sometimes I slept 4 hours total. Sometimes less. There were weeks when I pretended I already ate dinner, so Ethan wouldn't notice there wasn't enough food for both of us. I learned how to stretch soup. How to hide overdue bills. How to smile while lying about being okay. I sold my mother's necklace once to help Ethan attend a summer engineering camp. I told him I lost it. He cried harder over the necklace than I did. That was Ethan. Good-hearted. Gentle. Always feeling guilty for surviving. And now someone had turned my entire life into a joke printed beside a dinner plate. I slowly placed the card back on the table. I told myself. Not tonight. I would leave quietly. I would cry later. I would not destroy my brother's wedding over one cruel moment. But before I could turn away, a hand caught mine. Ethan. His chair scraped violently against the ballroom floor as he stood. The music kept playing for another few seconds before dying awkwardly into silence. Every guest turned toward us. Ethan looked down at the card in my hand. Then up at me. His face changed instantly. Not embarrassment. Not confusion. Rage. The kind that arrives when someone hurts the only person you would burn the world down to protect. He looked across the room directly at Richard Holloway. And in a calm voice sharp enough to cut glass, he said, "You just made the most expensive mistake of your life." The silence after my brother thanked him felt heavier than the insult itself. Nobody in that ballroom moved. The chandeliers still glowed softly above polished tables. Waiters still carried champagne between guests pretending not to stare. A violin version of some love song still played near the dance floor. But the wedding had stopped feeling like a celebration. Now it felt like a courtroom where everyone suddenly realized the wrong person had been put on trial. The bride's father stood near the head table with his jaw tight and his phone still in his hand. His expensive smile had disappeared. Not completely. Just enough for people to notice the anger hiding underneath it. My brother never raised his voice. That was the frightening part. He simply looked at him and said, "You planned this." The older man shrugged. "You are overreacting to a joke." My brother slowly picked up the place card from my hand. He looked at the printed sentence for several seconds, like he was forcing himself to fully understand what had been done. Then he turned the card around and held it toward the guests. "So everybody can see it clearly," he said. Nobody laughed this time. Not a single person. Because humiliation only feels entertaining when the victim stays small. The bride finally walked toward us. Her white dress brushed against the polished floor while every eye in the ballroom followed her. She looked pale. Not embarrassed. Shattered. "Dad," she whispered. Her father cut her off immediately. "Do not make this bigger than it already is." She stared at the card. Then at me. And slowly her face changed from confusion to horror. "You actually printed this?" The man sighed like he was exhausted by emotional people. "It was meant to lighten the mood." I asked quietly. "Whose mood?" That question seemed to echo through the room. The bride's mother hurried over with the kind of nervous smile wealthy people use when they want disaster to disappear without consequences. Everyone is tense, she said softly. Let's sit down and move forward. Move forward. As if humiliation was just another course between dinner and dessert. My brother looked at the bride. Did you know? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. And hearing that hurt me more than the card itself. Because I knew exactly how much he loved her. She shook her head immediately. No. I swear I didn't. Her father laughed under his breath. You are all acting like someone died. My brother answered. No. You just showed everybody exactly what you think of my family. A few guests lowered their eyes. Others pretended to check their phones. Cowardice spreads quickly in rich rooms. The bride looked at her father again. Apologize. That single word changed him. I saw it happen in real time. Until then he still believed he controlled the situation. But hearing his own daughter challenge him in public bruised something deeper than pride. His expression hardened. I will not apologize for honesty. The room went dead silent. The bride stared at him. Honesty? He gestured toward me carelessly. She raised her brother. Fine. That does not suddenly make her refined company. My stomach tightened. But before I could respond, my brother stepped forward. She worked herself half to death, so I could survive. The older man tilted his head. And now you are successful. Which means it is time to stop dragging poverty into every room you enter. That sentence hit harder than the card. Because now everyone understood the truth. This had never been a joke. He genuinely believed people like me were stains on polished rooms. The bride whispered. Dad, stop. But he was too angry now. Powerful people often mistake silence for agreement. And when someone finally resists them, they become reckless. He pointed toward me. She wants attention. People like this always do. I felt my brother tense beside me. But strangely, I no longer felt ashamed. I felt tired. Tired of people confusing sacrifice with weakness. Tired of pretending hard lives should stay invisible so comfortable people never feel uncomfortable. I looked directly at him and asked. What exactly about me embarrasses you? He answered immediately. The fact that you think suffering earns you status. I nodded slowly. No. I think surviving it with kindness does. For the first time all night, several people actually looked at me instead of through me. The bride's father noticed it too. And he hated it. Because cruel people lose power the moment others stop admiring them. He looked at my brother. You still have time to think carefully about this marriage. The bride turned sharply. What does that mean? He kept his eyes on my brother. It means loyalty matters. My brother laughed once. A cold, disbelieving laugh. You're threatening me at my wedding. I am reminding you how much your future depends on the relationships around you. There it was. Not hidden anymore. Not softened with fake politeness. Just naked control standing in the middle of a ballroom. The bride suddenly stepped beside my brother instead of beside her father. And the entire room noticed. Her father noticed too. His face darkened instantly. Clara, he warned quietly. But she did not move. Instead she said. No. You don't get to do this. Her mother looked horrified. Sweetheart, people are watching. Clara answered. Good. That word cut through the ballroom harder than shouting ever could. Because rich families survive on appearances. And suddenly the appearance was cracking open. Her father lowered his voice. You are embarrassing this family. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. No. You embarrassed us the moment you decided humiliating someone was funny. My brother squeezed her hand tightly. I could see the conflict tearing across his face. Love, anger, disappointment, shock, all fighting each other at once. Then the older man did something that changed everything. He pulled out his phone again. Right there in front of everyone. And calmly said, maybe certain business arrangements should be reconsidered. My brother went still. What are you talking about? The man looked almost bored now. The architecture firm offering you employment works closely with several partners I know. And partnerships depend on reputation. The bride's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I am very serious. The threat settled over the ballroom like smoke. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just terrifyingly calm. That was when I finally understood who this man really was. He did not scream. He did not throw things. He simply used power like a weapon and expected everyone else to call it responsibility. My brother stared at him. You would destroy my career because someone insulted my sister. The older man corrected him immediately. No. Because you forgot your place. And suddenly every expensive thing in that ballroom felt ugly to me. The flowers. The crystal glasses. The chandeliers. All of it built around one belief. That money made certain people untouchable. But my brother surprised everyone. Instead of backing down, he smiled. Small. Cold. Steady. Then he said, thank you. The older man frowned. For what? My brother looked around the ballroom slowly before answering. For proving my sister was right about people like you. The ballroom stayed frozen long after my brother said those words. Nobody reached for their drinks anymore. Nobody pretended to enjoy the music. Even the servers had stopped moving. It felt like the entire country club was holding its breath. The bride's father stared at my brother with the expression of a man who had spent his whole life being obeyed and had just discovered someone was no longer afraid of him. You should think very carefully before speaking to me like that, he said quietly. My brother answered. No. You should have thought carefully before humiliating my sister in public. The older man's jaw tightened. Then he laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because men like him laugh when they want to remind everyone they believe they still control the room. You are emotional, he said. That is your problem. I watched Clara's face change when he said that. Not anger. Recognition. Like she was finally seeing a pattern she had ignored her whole life. My brother took one slow step forward. No, he replied. My problem is that I trusted you. That sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. Because betrayal always hurts more than insult. The bride's mother immediately stepped between them. Please, she whispered desperately. Not tonight. But it was already too late for not tonight. The damage had been done the moment that card touched my plate. The older man slipped his phone back into his pocket and looked around the ballroom calmly. I think everyone needs a moment to cool down. Then he looked directly at me. You especially. I should have looked away. Years ago I probably would have. But something inside me had shifted the moment my brother stood beside me instead of pretending not to notice the humiliation. So I held his gaze and said, you planned this days in advance. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Because suddenly the cruelty sounded organized instead of accidental. The man shrugged. People make too much of words. I answered quietly. Only people who never suffer from them say that. For the first time that night. He had no immediate response. Just a sharp look that made it clear he was no longer annoyed. Now he was angry. Clara looked between us before finally speaking again. Dad. Apologize. Her voice shook slightly. Not from weakness. From heartbreak. The older man stared at her in disbelief. You are choosing this moment to rebel. I'm choosing basic decency. Over your family. She blinked slowly. No. For my family. That sentence hit him hard. I saw it in his face immediately. Because wealthy controlling men often confuse ownership with love. And when their children stop behaving like possessions, they interpret it as betrayal. He turned toward the guests and spread his hands slightly. You see what happens. One dramatic scene and suddenly everybody forgets years of support and sacrifice. My brother laughed bitterly. Sacrifice? The man's eyes snapped toward him. Yes. Everything I built for my daughter. The connections. The opportunities. The future. My brother nodded slowly. And now we know the price. The room fell silent again. I could almost feel people mentally picking sides now. Not openly. People in rooms like that rarely risk open honesty. But the atmosphere had changed. At the beginning of the night, I had been the embarrassing poor sister. Now everyone was watching a powerful man threaten his own daughter's future because she defended someone he considered beneath him. Clara looked close to tears. You really think money gives you the right to treat people like this? Her father answered instantly. No. Success gives me the responsibility to recognize who belongs in certain spaces. That sentence made several guests visibly uncomfortable. Because now even they could hear how ugly he sounded. But he either didn't notice. Or didn't care anymore. People noticed. His wife finally spoke again. Very softly. Richard. Please stop. But Richard ignored her completely. Instead he stood up straight and adjusted his cufflinks with slow controlled movements. I have spent 30 years building relationships, he said. I will not allow emotional chaos to damage them. My brother answered. No. You spent 30 years building power around people too afraid to challenge you. Richard's eyes hardened instantly. Careful. My brother didn't move. You know what the saddest part is? You could have apologized 10 minutes ago, and none of this would have happened. Richard smiled coldly. And you could have kept your dignity by staying quiet. That sentence finally broke something inside Clara. No, she snapped suddenly. That's what you do. Not dignity. Silence. Her father turned toward her sharply. Enough. But she kept going. All my life you taught me manners mattered more than honesty. Appearance mattered more than kindness. And tonight you humiliated a woman who sacrificed everything for her brother because you thought money made you superior. Clara. No. You need to hear this. Tears were running down her face now, but her voice stayed steady. He loves her because she protected him. People respect her because she survived hard things without becoming cruel. And honestly, she whispered, she has more class than anyone in this room. Complete silence. Even the music had stopped. Richard looked stunned. Not because strangers were criticizing him. Because his daughter was. That was the wound he never expected. He looked around the ballroom slowly. At the guests avoiding eye contact. At his wife quietly crying. At Clara standing beside my brother instead of beside him. And for one brief second. He looked smaller. But then his pride returned. Men like him often choose power over love, because power feels safer. My brother suddenly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. A folded piece of paper. He placed it carefully on the table in front of the older man. "What's this?" the man asked coldly. "My acceptance letter." The older man frowned slightly. "The architecture firm?" "Yes." "And?" My brother looked him directly in the eye. "You can take it away if you want." The bride gasped softly. I stared at him. Because I knew what that job meant. I remembered the nights he stayed awake teaching himself design software on an outdated laptop that sounded like it might explode. I remembered him skipping meals during college because he refused to ask me for more money. I remembered him calling me crying the day he got that offer because for the first time in his life he felt secure. And now he was placing all of it on the table. Willingly. The older man looked genuinely surprised. "You would throw away your future over this?" My brother shook his head slowly. "No. I'd be throwing it away if I became the kind of man who stayed quiet while someone humiliated the person who raised him." A woman near the back of the ballroom quietly covered her mouth. Someone else lowered their eyes. Because everybody understood the truth hidden inside those words. Loyalty sounds beautiful until it becomes inconvenient. The bride's father leaned forward slightly. "You are being naive." "No," my brother replied. "I'm finally seeing clearly." The older man turned toward me again. "All this because you could not take a joke gracefully." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because it amazed me how desperately cruel people need their victims to act calm, so they never have to face consequences. I said, "If it was a joke, why are you threatening careers to defend it?" That question spread through the ballroom like electricity. He had no clean answer. And for the first time all night, he picked up his phone again. "Fine," he said calmly. "If everyone wants honesty tonight, let's be honest." My stomach tightened immediately. Because his voice had changed. It was too calm. Too controlled. Dangerous people become quiet right before they try to hurt someone. He looked directly at my brother. "By tomorrow morning your job offer will disappear." Clara whispered. "Dad. And as for your sister?" His eyes shifted toward me. "I heard about that little community project she's been begging donors to support." My blood went cold. The Mobile Career Program. The one I had spent 2 years building for teenagers who couldn't afford career counseling or tutoring. Richard smiled faintly. "I wonder how excited sponsors will be once they hear she creates scenes at private events." My brother exploded forward instantly. "Don't you dare." 2 of his friends grabbed him before he could reach Richard. The ballroom erupted into panicked voices. Clara screamed. "Stop." But Richard just stood there calmly. Watching. Almost satisfied. Because this was exactly what he wanted. One emotional reaction. One moment of chaos. One excuse to paint us as unstable. I moved quickly in front of my brother and grabbed his arm. "Don't." He looked furious enough to shake apart. "Maya. Don't give him what he wants." Richard smiled slightly. "There it is. Control." I stared directly at him. "No. Protection. You wouldn't understand the difference." For the first time that night. His smile vanished completely. The ballroom never fully recovered after that moment. Even after the music started again. Nobody really returned to the wedding. People whispered behind champagne glasses. Guests kept checking their phones. Every smile looked forced now, stretched thin over tension that refused to disappear. Richard Ashford stood near the edge of the reception hall speaking quietly to several men in expensive suits. Calm. Controlled. Dangerously calm. That frightened me more than his anger. Because men like him did not scream when they planned damage. They smiled. My brother paced near the back exit with Clara trying desperately to calm him down. He threatened your entire future, he said to me. And now he's threatening yours too. I crossed my arms tightly. He wants you angry. He already got that. No, I said quietly. He wants public anger. Something ugly. Something he can use later. My brother ran both hands through his hair. For the first time since I had raised him as a teenager. He looked lost again. Not weak. Just heartbroken. Clara stood beside him silently before finally whispering. I didn't know he could go this far. I looked at her carefully. Part of me still wanted to protect her from the truth. But another part knew she needed to face it fully now. So I asked softly. How often does he destroy things when people disobey him? Her eyes filled immediately. And that silence answered everything. The wedding continued in fragments after that. The cake was cut. Pictures were taken. People danced awkwardly under soft golden lights while pretending the evening had not exploded in front of them. But the joy was gone. Every room carries emotional weight after humiliation. And that ballroom felt poisoned. Around midnight, my brother finally walked me to my car. The country club parking lot was quiet except for distant music leaking through the walls. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then suddenly he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. I'm sorry, he whispered. The apology shattered me more than the insult had. Because he sounded guilty for loving me publicly. I pulled back immediately. No. You did nothing wrong. He targeted you because of me. No, I said carefully. He targeted me because men like him think kindness without money is weakness. My brother looked exhausted. What if he actually destroys everything? I thought about the job offer. The community grant. The years we had both spent trying to climb out of survival mode. Then I answered honestly. I don't know. That honesty hurt him. I could see it. Because older siblings are supposed to sound certain. Strong. Unshakable. But the truth was. I was terrified. Not of embarrassment. Of power. People like Richard did not need to win arguments. They only needed enough influence to quietly close doors. Before my brother could answer, Clara stepped closer. He won't stop unless someone stops him. Her voice sounded different now. Less sheltered. Like reality had finally reached her. I asked softly. Are you ready for what that costs? She looked back toward the glowing ballroom windows where her father still stood surrounded by wealthy guests. Then she said. I think I already started paying for it. I drove home after that with shaking hands. Chicago looked strangely empty after midnight. Streetlights blurred through my windshield while pieces of the night replayed endlessly in my head. The card. The laughter. The threats. But one thing kept disturbing me most. Richard had not acted impulsively. He had prepared. That meant there were probably other things we still didn't know. When I finally reached my apartment, my phone already held dozens of notifications. Messages from unknown numbers. Social media tags. Wedding guests whispering apologies through text instead of saying them aloud in person. One message stood out immediately. It came from a woman I didn't recognize. I worked with Ashford Hotels for 3 years. Be careful. He destroys people quietly. No explanation. No details. Just that sentence. My stomach tightened. I barely slept. At 6:14 the next morning, my phone rang. My brother. The moment I answered, I knew something had happened. His breathing sounded uneven. Maya. I sat up instantly. What? Long silence. Then. The author's gone. Everything inside me went still. What do you mean gone? Harrington and Vale emailed me an hour ago. They said they decided to move in another direction. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. Richard had not been bluffing. My brother laughed bitterly into the phone. He actually did it. I could picture him perfectly. Standing in his apartment still wearing yesterday's wrinkled dress shirt, staring at his future collapsing through a screen. And somehow that hurt worse than the public humiliation. Because this was private destruction. Calculated. Clean. The kind rich people preferred. I'm sorry, I whispered. No, he answered immediately. Don't do that. None of this is your fault. But both of us knew the truth was more complicated. Not because I deserved blame. Because loving me publicly had cost him something. Before I could speak again, he said quietly. There's more. Cold fear crawled through my chest. What now? The community grant. I stopped breathing. My brother continued. They froze the review process this morning. I stared at the wall in silence. The second step skills program. 2 years of applications. Meetings. Late night proposals. Volunteer recruiting. Frozen with one phone call. My brother sounded furious now. He's punishing teenagers because his ego got hurt. But strangely, I no longer felt shocked. Just tired. Deeply tired. Because for the first time I fully understood something ugly about the world. Powerful people often believe generosity belongs only to people they approve of. I opened my laptop immediately and checked my email. There it was. A polished professional message filled with corporate sympathy. Pending further evaluation. Temporary review delay. Concerns regarding public controversy. Carefully chosen words designed to sound neutral while destroying something quietly. I leaned back slowly in my chair. And suddenly, I started laughing. Not happily. The exhausted kind of laugh people make when reality finally becomes too obvious to deny. My brother heard it through the phone. Maya. He really thought fear would make me disappear. What are you talking about? I stared at the email again. Then at the growing stream of messages online from wedding guests whispering about what happened. And for the first time since the ballroom, an idea formed. Small. Sharp. Dangerous. I asked quietly. Did anybody photograph the place card? A long pause. Then my brother answered. Yes. I stood up slowly. Good, I said. Because I think Richard Ashford forgot something important. What? I looked out my apartment window while morning sunlight slowly climbed across the city. Then I answered. Humiliation works both ways. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 35 years old, and the night I walked into my younger brother's wedding was supposed to be the first peaceful night I'd had in years. I wasn't there for attention. I wasn't there for praise. And I definitely wasn't there expecting anyone to thank me for everything I sacrificed to help him get there. I came because the little boy I practically raised was getting married. And for one single evening. I wanted to sit quietly, smile proudly, and feel like I belonged beside him without needing to justify why. The wedding was being held at a luxury estate outside Charleston, South Carolina. Everything about the place screamed money. Crystal chandeliers. Perfect white roses. Gold-trimmed glasses. Soft piano music floating through the ballroom. Even the air felt expensive. People spoke softly there, like loud emotions weren't allowed inside rich rooms. I remember standing near the entrance for a second, adjusting my navy blue dress, and trying not to feel out of place. Because no matter how polished a room looks, some people can still make you feel poor without saying a word. My brother Ethan spotted me almost immediately. His entire face lit up. "Claire." He walked straight through a crowd of guests and hugged me so tightly I almost cried right there. For a second, everything felt okay again. Not because life had been easy, but because he still looked at me the same way he did when he was 14 and terrified after our parents died. Like I was home. "You look beautiful," he told me. I laughed softly. "You look terrified." "I am terrified." "That means you actually love her." He smiled at that. And for one small moment, I truly believed the night would be good. Then I noticed the bride's father watching us from across the ballroom. Richard Holloway. Tall. Silver-haired. Perfect tuxedo. The kind of man who smiled without warmth. I had met him twice before. For the next 2 days, my apartment stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a war room. Screenshots covered my kitchen table. Emails stayed open across my laptop. My phone kept vibrating with messages from people connected to the wedding. Some were sympathetic. Some were curious. And some were clearly terrified of Richard Ashford finding out they had spoken to us at all. That told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he really was. My brother barely slept. Every time I called him, he sounded more exhausted. Not just angry. Wounded. Because losing the job hurt. But discovering the people behind it could be manipulated so easily hurt even more. Clara had moved into his apartment temporarily after a screaming match with her father ended with him calling our family a permanent liability. That sentence broke something inside her. I could hear it in her voice now. The sheltered certainty she once carried was gone. One night she sat at my kitchen table holding a mug of untouched coffee and whispered, "I used to think wealth made people safer." I asked softly, "And now?" She stared down at the table. "I think it just gives cruel people quieter ways to hurt others." Neither of us spoke after that. Because there was nothing to argue with. The third morning, Clara arrived carrying a folder. Not a purse. Not luggage. A thick grey folder clutched tightly against her chest like evidence. My stomach tightened immediately. "What is that?" She closed the apartment door carefully before answering. "Things my father never thought I would look at." My brother stood up instantly. "Clara." But she shook her head. "No. You both deserve to know." She opened the folder slowly across my kitchen table. Emails. Internal memos. Contact lists. Printed conversations between Richard and business partners. At first I only skimmed them. Then one message made my blood run cold. "Delay the Bennett hire until emotions settle. No formal rejection yet." Pressure usually solves these situations quietly. My brother grabbed the paper from my hands. His face went pale. He planned this immediately after the wedding. Clara nodded. "There's more." She pulled out another printed email. This one mentioned my community grant directly. "Recommend temporary suspension until reputational concerns are reassessed." I stared at the sentence in disbelief. Reputational concerns. Clara looked sick. He called members of the review board personally. My brother slammed his hand against the counter hard enough to rattle dishes. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. "It's calculated." That was the frightening part. Richard never sounded emotional in writing. Never cruel directly. Everything was phrased politely. Professionally. Like a man ordering lives rearranged from behind clean language and expensive offices. Clara sat down slowly. There's something else. The way she said it made the room colder. She reached into the folder one final time and removed a small flash drive. My brother frowned. What's on that? She swallowed hard. My cousin recorded part of the conversation after the rehearsal dinner. I stared at her. Recorded. She was uncomfortable with how my father was talking about your family. Clara plugged the drive into my laptop with shaking hands. A moment later Richard's voice filled my kitchen. Relaxed. Confident. Cruel. The sister is the problem, he said in the recording. She carries herself like sacrifice makes her important. Someone laughed softly in the background. Then Richard continued. People like that survive hardship once and suddenly think suffering equals value. My brother turned away immediately. I stayed completely still. Not because the words didn't hurt. Because they clarified everything. This had never been about one wedding joke. Richard genuinely believed people without wealth existed beneath him. The recording continued. If the boy marries into this family, Richard said, he'll eventually need to understand where loyalty belongs. A male voice asked. And if he doesn't? Richard laughed quietly. Then we teach him scarcity. Silence filled my apartment after the recording ended. Heavy. Breathing silence. My brother looked ready to explode. Clara looked devastated. But strangely, I felt calm. Not peaceful. Focused. Because truth does something important once it fully reveals itself. It removes confusion. My brother finally spoke. I'm posting it. No, I answered immediately. He stared at me in disbelief. Maya, he destroyed our future. And if we react emotionally right now, I said carefully. He wins. Clara frowned slightly. What do you mean? I closed the laptop slowly. Men like Richard survive scandals because they know how to make victims look unstable. My brother paced across the apartment. So what? We do nothing. No. We do this correctly. He stopped pacing. I looked at both of them before continuing. We give him one final chance to apologize privately. My brother almost laughed. You think he'll apologize? No, I answered honestly. But I think he'll talk. Clara understood first. I saw it happen in her eyes. You want proof? I want him comfortable enough to say exactly who he is without a ballroom full of witnesses. My brother stared at me for several long seconds. Then slowly. He nodded. The meeting was arranged for Saturday afternoon at the Ashford estate. Just hearing those words made my stomach tighten. Estate. Not house. Not home. Estate. Everything about Richard's world sounded designed to remind others how much space his money occupied. Saturday arrived grey and cold. Rain tapped softly against the windshield while we drove through tall black gates toward the mansion. The place looked less like a family home and more like a luxury hotel pretending to have emotions. Stone walls. Massive windows. Perfect landscaping. Nothing personal. Nothing warm. Clara sat silently beside my brother in the back seat. Neither of them had spoken much during the drive. Fear changes conversations. Before we got out of the car, my brother looked at me carefully. If he apologizes, do we stop? I thought about the grant. The job. The humiliation. Then I answered truthfully. Yes. Not because I wanted peace for Richard. Because I wanted freedom for us. We were led into a formal sitting room, where Richard already waited beside a fireplace holding a glass of wine. Even now, he looked composed. His wife sat quietly nearby with exhausted eyes. A lawyer occupied the chair beside them. Of course there was a lawyer. Richard stood slowly when we entered. But he never smiled. "Let's make this efficient," he said calmly. My brother immediately stiffened beside me. I stepped forward first. "We came because Clara asked for one private conversation, before this becomes public." Richard gave a faint laugh. "Public? That sounds dramatic." "No," I replied quietly. "It sounds preventable." His eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time since the wedding, I think he realized we were no longer afraid of him. The room smelled like leather, expensive cologne, and rain drifting faintly through cracked windows. Richard Ashford remained standing near the fireplace, with one hand resting against the glass of wine, like he was still hosting a business meeting instead of watching his family fall apart. His lawyer sat silently beside him taking mental notes. His wife looked exhausted enough to disappear into the furniture. And Clara? Clara looked at her father the way people look at places they once called home, before realizing they were never safe there. Richard spoke first. "So," he said calmly, "what exactly do you want?" My brother almost answered immediately, but I touched his arm lightly before stepping forward. "One honest apology." Richard smiled faintly. "For a misunderstanding?" "No," I said. "For deliberate humiliation. For threatening careers. For freezing a community program, because your ego got hurt." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Richard noticed it. That irritated him more than my words. Powerful men hate witnesses once witnesses stop admiring them. He set his wine glass down carefully. "You are exaggerating." I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because cruelty always sounds smaller when explained by the person who caused it. "You printed an insult and placed it at my seat before your daughter's wedding," I said quietly. "You contacted employers. You interfered with non-profit funding. Which part feels exaggerated to you?" Richard's face hardened. "You created a public spectacle." My brother stepped forward immediately. "No. You did." Richard ignored him completely and kept his eyes on me. "You could have left quietly that night." That sentence told me everything. Not apology. Not regret. Just frustration that humiliation had failed to stay controlled. I asked softly, "Would you have treated a wealthy guest that way?" He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Silence exposed him more clearly than any argument. Clara finally spoke. "Dad. Please stop pretending this was about manners." Richard turned toward her sharply. "You are still too emotional to understand what happened." Her eyes filled instantly. "No. I finally understand perfectly." He looked genuinely offended by that. Not hurt. Offended. As though clarity itself was disrespect. "You are throwing away your future for these people," he said coldly. My brother laughed once. "These people?" Richard's expression darkened. "You know exactly what I mean." And there it was again. That belief sitting underneath everything. That love mattered less without status attached to it. My brother moved closer beside me. "You know what's funny? My sister spent half her life making sure I survived. And somehow you still think she's the burden in this room." Richard answered instantly. "She made survival her entire identity." I felt Clara flinch beside us. Because now even she could hear how deeply her father despised struggle itself. I looked directly at him. "No. I made compassion my identity. You just confuse compassion with weakness." Something dangerous flashed across his face then. Not rage. Contempt. The pure cold contempt of a man who genuinely believed kindness without money existed beneath him. He stepped closer slowly. I built everything my daughter has. Clara whispered. And now you're trying to use it to control her. Richard ignored her. I gave her safety. Opportunity. A future. My brother answered. No. You gave her conditions. The room went silent again. Even the lawyer looked uncomfortable now. Richard stared at my brother for several long seconds before speaking again. You still think love is enough to survive this world? My brother nodded once. And you still think fear is respect? That hit him. I saw it immediately. His jaw tightened. His posture stiffened. Because deep down, people like Richard know the difference. They just spend years pretending not to. Then he looked at me again, and said the sentence that finally destroyed whatever remained of his daughter's loyalty. I am willing to compensate you generously if you remove yourself from their lives permanently. Nobody moved. For a second I honestly wondered if I had heard him correctly. Clara looked physically sick. My brother's face went white with fury. But Richard continued calmly. You sacrificed enough already. Take the money. Start over somewhere else. Quietly. His lawyer closed his eyes briefly, like even he couldn't believe the conversation anymore. And suddenly, I understood something important. Richard truly believed everyone had a price, because money had solved every problem in his life for decades. He could not imagine love existing without transaction attached to it. I asked quietly. You think I raised my brother so I could sell him later? Richard shrugged. I think everyone eventually chooses comfort. The sadness on Clara's face nearly broke me. Because in that moment she finally saw the truth clearly. Her father did not understand love at all. Only ownership. I reached slowly into my bag and placed my phone on the coffee table. Then I pressed play. Richard's recorded voice filled the room immediately. The sister is the problem. His face changed instantly. The lawyer sat upright. Clara's mother covered her mouth. The second recording followed. Then we teach him scarcity. Richard lunged forward. Turn that off. But I didn't. The final recording played next. His own voice from earlier that afternoon offering me money to disappear from my brother's life. Silence crashed across the room afterward. Heavy. Total. Irreversible. Richard looked stunned for the first time since the wedding. Not guilty. Cornered. His lawyer stood immediately. Richard, he said sharply. Do not say another word. But Richard was already unraveling. You recorded me. I answered calmly. No. You exposed yourself. Clara began crying quietly beside my brother. Not loud dramatic crying. The devastated kind that comes when someone finally mourns a parent who is still alive. Richard looked at her desperately. Clara. But she stepped backward. That hurt him more than the recordings. I could see it. Because losing reputation frightened him. But losing ownership terrified him. You chose this, she whispered. No, he snapped. They manipulated you. My brother laughed bitterly. There it is. Nothing is ever your fault. Richard pointed toward the door, shaking with anger now. Get out. And somehow, that became the most honest thing he said all day. We left without another word. Rain poured heavily outside while we walked back toward the car. Nobody spoke during the drive home. Not because there was nothing to say. Because some truths arrived too heavily for immediate conversation. That night I uploaded everything. The place card. The emails. The recordings. No dramatic captions. No screaming. No revenge speech. Just facts. I explained exactly what happened at the wedding. How Richard used influence to punish people privately. How he targeted a community program meant for struggling teenagers. How he offered money to remove me from my brother's life. Then I closed my laptop and waited. The internet exploded before morning. By sunrise the story had spread across Reddit, TikTok, Instagram, and local news pages. People weren't reacting only to the insult. They were reacting to recognition. Older siblings wrote about raising brothers and sisters while being treated like unpaid background characters afterward. Teachers shared stories about students needing programs like mine. Single mothers. Caretakers. Working-class families. Thousands of people recognized the kind of cruelty Richard represented because they had survived smaller versions of it themselves. One message made me cry harder than anything else. I raised my younger sister too. Thank you for reminding me my sacrifice mattered. The architecture firm publicly restored my brother's job offer 3 days later. He declined it. Not because he was angry. Because he no longer wanted a future connected to people who folded under pressure so easily. The community grant came back too. Except now donations flooded in from strangers across the country. $5. $20. Hundreds sometimes. Enough to finally launch the mobile career program by the end of summer. 17 teenagers showed up on opening day. Then 24 the next week. Then more. My brother volunteered on weekends. Clara helped students with college essays and interview practice. And slowly, something beautiful happened. The humiliation Richard created stopped belonging to him. It became useful. 3 months later Richard came to my apartment alone. No assistants. No polished smile. No expensive confidence. Just a tired man standing quietly outside my door. When I opened it, he looked older somehow. Smaller. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then finally he said, "I was wrong." I believed he meant it. I also knew it had arrived too late. Because apologies matter most before destruction, not after consequences. I didn't invite him inside. I simply said, "You thought money could buy silence, loyalty, and respect. But none of those things survive once people realize your kindness always had conditions attached." His eyes lowered slowly. For the first time since the wedding. He looked human. Not powerful. Not important. Just lonely. And strangely, I didn't hate him anymore. I pitied him. Because people like Richard spend their entire lives building empires without realizing fear is not the same thing as love. I closed the door gently after that. Not angrily. Peacefully. And that was the real ending. Not revenge. Freedom. My brother did not become successful because wealthy people opened doors for him. He became successful because love carried him long enough to build his own future. And I did not win because the internet destroyed Richard Ashford. I won because I finally stopped allowing powerful people to define my worth. That is the lesson I hope people remember. Education is not just degrees, polished manners, or expensive rooms. Real education is empathy. Gratitude. Accountability. The courage to protect people who protected you first. Money can buy comfort. It can buy attention. It can even buy fear for a while. But it can never buy genuine respect once people finally see who you truly are. And if you were in my place, would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you let the